It started with silence, not the peaceful kind, the kind that weighs on your chest until you forget how to breathe. Margaret sat by the window of her old house in Savannah, Georgia, watching the rain slide down the glass, the same window where, years ago, she had watched her children run into the yard. Now the yard was empty. So was the table. So was the chair across from her. Her husband Henry had been gone for almost 15 years. Her children, Claire and Nathan, visited less and less. Lately, their voices on the phone sounded more like duty than love. "Mom, you should rest more," Claire would say. "Mom, maybe it's time to sell the house," Nathan added. Margaret smiled the same tired smile every time. She had built this house with Henry, brick by brick. Each crack in the wall was a memory. But memories don't pay the bills. The doctor's words still echoed in her mind. "You need surgery soon, otherwise the infection might spread." She nodded, but all she could think about was the cost. A week later, Claire called again, not to ask about the surgery, but to tell her they were leaving for Europe. "Just 2 weeks, Mom. You'll be fine. Rest, okay?" Margaret stared at the phone after the call ended. Fine. She'd be fine. She cooked herself soup that night. She set 2 plates out of habit, one for Henry. She whispered, "You'd know what to do." The next morning, she collapsed near the stairs. When she woke up, the world was white and smelled of antiseptic. Hospital walls, a nurse adjusting her IV, an empty bedside table, her handbag, missing. She waited for the sound of familiar steps, for her children's voices. But days passed, then a week. No one came. The nurse checked her chart. "Any family visiting soon, ma'am?" Margaret smiled softly. "They're traveling." The nurse nodded, pretending not to understand the sadness in her eyes. When the doctor said she could go home, she had no ride, so a volunteer named Ellen helped her take a cab back. When she reached her porch, her heart sank. Mail piled high, flowers dry in their pots, and a paper taped to her door. Overdue property tax notice. Margaret held the letter close, like a wound. Inside, the words were cold. Final warning. Property will be subject to lien sale. That night, she sat alone in the dim kitchen, bills spread out like battlefield debris. Her hands shook, her breath caught. She looked at Henry's photo and said quietly, "I think it's time, love. I think it's time to let it all go." 2 days later, a sign appeared on her lawn, "For sale." By the end of the week, she'd met the buyer, a young couple with a baby and big dreams. Margaret smiled through it all, though her heart twisted with each room they admired. When they left, she sat on the floor of her empty bedroom, running her hand over the wooden boards. "They'll make new memories," she whispered, "and maybe that's enough." Before she left, she took only 3 things: Henry's watch, her wedding ring, and the photo of their first house together. Then she locked the door one last time and slipped the keys into an envelope. She wrote on the front, "For Claire and Nathan when they come home." And for the first time in years, Margaret didn't look back. The plane touched down in Atlanta with a soft jolt. Nathan stretched his legs, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. Beside him, Claire scrolled through photos on her phone. Vineyards, cafes, smiling faces that already felt distant. "Mom's going to be so happy to see us early," she said. "Maybe we'll take her out to dinner. Surprise her." Nathan nodded, distracted. He hadn't called his mother once during the trip. Neither had Claire. Every time they thought about it, they found excuses. Poor signal, different time zones, exhaustion. They both believed there would always be time later. When the taxi turned onto Maple Street, Claire leaned forward. Something looked off. The flowers were gone from the porch, the curtains were missing, and right there, in the middle of the front lawn, a big white sign with red letters, "Sold." Nathan frowned. "Wait, what the hell?" He jumped out of the car before it even stopped, keys already in hand. But when he tried the door, it wouldn't open. He tried again, harder. Nothing. Through the window, all he saw were empty walls. No furniture, no clock. The faint outline of where family photos once hung. "Mom!" he shouted, his voice cracked. "Mom!" The echo answered him, cold and hollow. Claire's face went pale. She wouldn't just leave, would she? Then a voice came from next door. It was Mrs. Delgado, their mother's neighbor. She was holding a laundry basket, eyes soft but knowing. "You're too late," she said quietly. "What do you mean?" Nathan asked. "She moved out." "When?" Claire's voice trembled. "Last month. Sold the house, packed her bags, didn't say much, just smiled." "Where did she go?" Mrs. Delgado shook her head. "She didn't tell anyone, but she seemed free, happier than I'd seen her in years." Then she reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope. "Your mother left this for you. Told me to give it to you when you came back." Nathan tore it open with shaking hands. Inside, 2 pages, written in their mother's familiar cursive. "My dear Claire and Nathan, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Don't look for me. I'm not lost. I'm simply somewhere new. When I was in the hospital, I waited. I waited for your calls, your voices, your faces. They never came. And that's when I realized I'd been waiting my whole life, waiting for someone else to decide when I mattered. I sold the house not out of anger, but out of mercy, for myself. I gave the money to those who still believe in kindness, because I no longer need walls to prove I have a home. Don't feel guilty. Feel free. Live your lives fully. Just remember, love doesn't vanish. It only changes its address." At the bottom, her signature. "Love always, Mom." For a long time, neither of them spoke. Claire sat on the porch steps, staring at the cracks between the boards. Nathan just stood there, the letter trembling in his hands. "She really did it," Claire whispered. "She left us." "No," said Mrs. Delgado softly. "She just finally chose herself." The wind picked up, rustling the empty trees. The street that once smelled like dinner and laughter now carried only dust and silence. Nathan folded the letter carefully, as if afraid it might vanish too. "Wherever she is," he murmured. "I hope she's okay." Mrs. Delgado smiled faintly. "Oh, she's more than okay. She's free." Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, on the coast of southern Italy, Margaret sat at a seaside cafe writing in a small notebook. Day 1, the air smells like freedom. Day 2, I've stopped checking the phone. Day 3, I'm learning how to smile without reason. She paused, looking out at the water. The waves were calm, whispering secrets she didn't need to understand. A waiter passed by, placing an espresso in front of her. "Grazie," she said softly. The man nodded, then smiled. "You look peaceful, Signora." Margaret smiled back. "I finally am." Weeks turned into months. The shock of their mother's disappearance faded, but the guilt didn't. Claire buried herself in work. Nathan stopped calling friends. Every time they passed Maple Street, they turned away. Until one evening, Claire received an envelope. No return address, no stamp. Just her name, written in the same careful handwriting she thought she'd never see again. She opened it slowly. Inside was a postcard, a watercolor of a seaside town, Amalfi, Italy. On the back, a short note. "Don't worry about me. I'm home. M." Her hands shook. "Nathan, she's alive." He looked up, disbelieving. "What do you mean?" "She sent this." Claire passed him the card. Nathan studied it for a long moment, then quietly, "She sounds happy." It took another few weeks before they learned more. Claire, restless, began searching online. Her mother's name appeared in a small local newspaper article. Headline: American retiree establishes fund for local veterans and families. There it was, Margaret Wilson Foundation. A short paragraph described how an elderly woman from the United States had donated a large sum to support struggling families and schools in southern Italy. Claire read it aloud, her voice trembling. She used the money from the house. She turned it into this?" Nathan sat in silence. All the anger he'd carried began to melt into something far heavier: shame. "She did something good," he said finally, "better than either of us ever did." Claire nodded. "And she didn't even tell us." They decided to go find her. 2 weeks later, they landed in Naples. The air was warm, thick with the scent of the sea and citrus. They rented a small car and drove down the winding roads of the Amalfi Coast. Cliffs, vineyards, tiny houses that looked like they were carved out of dreams. The address from the article led them to a small town called Atrani, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, and where time seemed to move slower, as if out of respect for the view. A small sign near the square caught their eye: Café del Sole. They parked and stepped inside. Behind the counter stood a gray-haired man polishing glasses. He looked up with a friendly smile. "Buongiorno." "Hello," Claire began. "We're looking for a woman named Margaret Wilson. She's our mother." The man paused, recognition lighting his eyes. "Ah, la signora Americana. She comes every morning. Always the same seat, always cappuccino and biscotti." "Is she here now?" Nathan asked quickly. The man shook his head. "No, but she will come soon. She never misses her morning coffee." He hesitated, then added softly, "She smiles a lot, but her eyes, they carry stories." They waited. Minutes stretched into an hour. Then the bell above the cafe door rang softly, and there she was. Margaret. She wore a wide straw hat, a light dress, and a linen scarf the color of the ocean. She looked healthy, glowing. When she saw them, she froze. For a moment, none of them spoke. Only the sound of the waves outside filled the air. Claire's voice broke first. "Mom." Margaret's eyes softened. "You found me." Nathan stepped forward, guilt written all over his face. "We didn't know what we'd done to you until it was too late." Margaret smiled gently. "You didn't do anything to me, Nathan. You just didn't see me." Tears welled in Claire's eyes. "Can we talk?" Margaret nodded. They sat by the window. The sea shimmered beyond the glass, endless and calm. She spoke quietly, with no bitterness, only truth. "When you grow older, people stop listening. They think you've told all your stories. But I still had one more to live." She looked out toward the water. "Henry and I dreamed of traveling the world when we were your age. But then the kids came, the bills came, the years came. I stayed. And when I finally looked up, you were grown. And I was invisible." Claire reached for her hand. "We were selfish." Margaret shook her head. "No, you were young. I just forgot how to be anything else but your mother." Nathan's voice cracked. "We thought you were angry." She smiled faintly. "No, I was free." Outside, a church bell rang. The cafe owner refilled their cups, pretending not to notice the tears. Margaret looked at both of them. "I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't need it. But I hope you'll remember this. It's never too late to start again, even at 75. Nathan laughed through his tears. "You're unbelievable." She leaned back, a glimmer of pride in her eyes. "So they tell me." The three of them sat in silence, the waves crashing gently below. It was a silence full of everything they hadn't said for years, and finally could. When they left, Margaret stood in the doorway watching them disappear down the narrow street. For the first time, she didn't feel abandoned. She felt whole. As the sun began to set, she turned toward the sea and whispered, "Thank you, Henry, for teaching me how to find the light, even alone." And somewhere, carried by the wind, it felt like someone answered back. Morning came soft and gold. The town woke to church bells and the smell of bread. Margaret walked the stone steps to the square, slow but steady, her hand trailing the warm wall. She carried a folder under her arm, contracts, letters, receipts. Her little foundation had grown. She paused at the cafe. "Buongiorno, signora," the owner said. Buongiorno, she answered, smiling. He handed her a cappuccino without asking. He always knew. Across the square, a school bus stopped. Children spilled out like sunlight. 2 of them, siblings, waved at her. Their mother had picked up extra shifts because their father's benefits were delayed. The foundation paid the school lunch fees for 3 months. The kids never forgot. They never would. Margaret sat at her familiar table and opened the folder. Inside were fresh applications. A young nursing aide who studied nights, a grandson of a librarian who'd lost his place to budget cuts, a retired mechanic who needed a small grant to reopen his workshop by the pier. Small things, she whispered, but small things hold the roof up. She wrote slowly, carefully. Her hand still shook sometimes, but her mind was clear. Approved with conditions. Return with a letter from the parish. When she finished, she closed the folder and looked out to sea. The water was calm. The horizon was a thin line of light. Somewhere across that light, her children moved through their own lives. Claire emailed first. The message was simple. Mom, thank you for today. I didn't know how much I needed to see you live your life, not around us, but for you. I'm coming back in autumn, not to take, to help. Love, C. Margaret read it 3 times. Then she typed her reply. Bring comfortable shoes. We walk a lot here. Love, Mom. She chuckled to herself. Then she forwarded the same thread to Nathan. He wrote back in 1 sentence. I've enrolled in a weekend program for elder care volunteers. You were right. We didn't see you. I'm learning to look. She placed the phone face down on the table and pressed her palms to the wood. Henry would have loved this moment. He always said life turns when you stop pushing and start listening. That evening, the town hall filled with neighbors. There were folding chairs, a small stage, a microphone that squeaked at the worst times. On the wall hung a banner with simple words, the Grant Wilson Foundation, Annual Gathering. No fanfare, no orchestra, just people with names and hands and histories. The mayor spoke first, short, kind. Then the cafe owner told a story about a winter when an old heater failed and a quiet donation appeared in his mailbox. No note, only a receipt. Everyone looked at Margaret. She looked at the floor. Next, a boy of 16 stood up with shaking knees. He read from a crumpled paper about his grandmother, a librarian, who taught him to love books with worn spines. Now I want to study history, he said, because someone here believes in people like us. He didn't look at Margaret, but his voice softened on the last word, us. At the end, the mayor asked Margaret to say something. She walked to the small microphone. She felt her age in her knees. She felt her years in her breath, but her voice was steady. I used to think love meant staying, she said, and it does. But sometimes love also means leaving. Not to punish, to live, to show the people you love that the heart doesn't end when its job changes. She paused. The room was quiet. Even the squeaky chair in the second row held its tongue. I am an old woman, she said. I have made mistakes. I have waited too long to speak, but I have learned this. Home isn't a house. It's a promise you keep to yourself. And when you keep it, you have more to give. She stepped back. Applause rose, gentle at first, then warm enough to fill the room. She bowed briefly, because she was never good at standing in the middle. Claire arrived in autumn as promised. Her hair was pulled back. Her eyes were tired but clear. She brought a small suitcase and a notebook with colored tabs. I'm not here to fix you, she told her mother at the door. I'm here to carry boxes. They carried boxes. They visited the school together. Claire measured shelves for a reading corner, argued politely with a contractor, and taught 2 children how to catalog donated books. At lunch, they sat by the water with sandwiches wrapped in paper. Seagulls hovered. Claire stared at the horizon. Mom, she said, I thought you left us. Margaret didn't look away from the sea. No, I left the place where I had already disappeared. Claire nodded slowly. I understand now. She reached for her mother's hand. They held on a little too long for strangers, and just long enough for family. That night, they cooked pasta in a pan too small for the job. They laughed when the sauce jumped like fire. They burned the first batch of garlic and started again. The second tasted like memory. Before bed, Claire opened her notebook. "I made a list," she said, smiling. 10 ways to make the foundation more boring." Boring? It means sustainable. Margaret laughed. "Good. I always wanted something boring to last." Winter came with soft rain. Nathan sent photos of a community center he had helped repaint. He looked different. Not younger, more useful. He wrote shorter now, but between the lines there were bridges. "Mom, the seniors at the center like trivia nights. I told them about your atlas with the tiny maps. I miss that book. Do you still have it?" She took a picture of Henry's old atlas, open to a page of winding roads. She sent it back. "Still here. You'll hold it again. Bring your own bookmarks. Mine are recipes." In late January, the doctor warned Margaret to slow down. Not a crisis, just the usual whisper of age. She nodded and agreed to rest. She rested like she lived now, on purpose. She slept longer, she walked shorter, she drank more water and fewer conversations. On a quiet Sunday, she wrote one more letter. Not a farewell, a map. "If you are reading this, I am likely where I love to be most. Near the sea, near books, near the sound of people eating bread and telling stories. Please do not gather in black. Gather with soup. Tell someone what they taught you. Then tell them again in case they didn't hear the first time." She placed the letter in the same folder as her papers. She tied the folder with a ribbon. Henry would have teased her for being so tidy. Spring returned. The square grew noisy with tourists and markets. Margaret walked slower now, but her smile arrived first. A small ceremony was held at the school. The reading corner was finished. Low shelves, soft lamps, a rug that looked like a field. Children sprawled like cats over cushions. Claire adjusted a lamp and stepped back. The principal asked Margaret to cut a ribbon. She held the scissors, light as feathers. The ribbon fell with a whisper. A little girl tugged her sleeve. "Signora, will you stay and read?" Margaret sat in a low chair and opened a book with a fox on the cover. Her voice trembled on the first sentence, then found its level. Children leaned in. A boy fell asleep with his cheek on his arm. Peace isn't loud. It's a warm room and a page turning. On the way home, they walked along the quay. Sun on the water. Wind soft as fresh linen. Claire glanced at her mother. "Do you ever regret it?" Margaret thought for a long time. "No, I regret the years I didn't know I could go, not the day I did." Claire nodded. "That's what I wanted to hear." They kept walking, shoulder to shoulder, matching the sea's slow rhythm. At the corner, the cafe bell rang. The owner waved them in. He set a plate of biscotti on the table, no charge. People here understood the currency of kindness. Margaret lifted her cup. "To boring things that last," she said. Claire lifted hers. "To brave things that begin late." They clinked cups gently. They drank. They didn't rush. A year later, the foundation plaque was replaced with a sturdier one. The first had faded. The new one held stronger letters, the Grant Wilson Foundation. For those who remembered when others forgot. That afternoon, Nathan finally made it to Atrani. He arrived with a carry-on and paint under his nails. He hugged his mother. He hugged his sister. He cried into his sleeve and pretended it was the wind. They spent 3 days doing nothing important. They ate tomatoes that tasted like July. They argued about the best route up the stairs. They bought a too-heavy melon and carried it together, laughing at themselves. On the last night, they walked to the overlook where the town meets the sky, lights below, stars above. In the dark, Nathan spoke. "Mom, I used to be angry that you left us." "I know," she said. "I'm grateful now because you taught me what leaving is for." "What is it for, Nathan?" "To find your life, so you can give it." They stood without words. Some moments don't need them. Years pass whether we approve or not. Margaret's hair grew whiter. Her step grew smaller. Her world did not shrink. It concentrated. When her time finally came, it came like a tide, quiet, certain, natural. She was at home, near the window that watched the sea. Claire held her left hand. Nathan held her right. The cafe owner waited in the kitchen with soup. The doctor nodded from the door, hat in his hand. Margaret opened her eyes one last time. "You're here," she whispered. "We're here," they answered. She looked past them, toward the light that lay on the water. "Henry," she said softly, and smiled the small, private smile of a woman who kept her promise. The room was still. Then the gulls called. Then the town carried on. They did not gather in black. They gathered with soup. They read to children. They replaced 2 broken lamps. They wrote the names of quiet helpers on little cards and taped them to the wall. At the school, a boy asked Claire, "Was she famous?" Claire thought about it. "No," she said. "She was useful." The boy nodded like he understood. Nathan took the old atlas back to the square. He showed the children the tiny roads that crossed the world like veins. He traced one with his finger. "This one," he said, "leads to a place where a woman remembered who she was, and everyone else got better because of it." He closed the book. He breathed out. He was not a child, but he felt like one who had found the path home. At dusk, Claire sat on the terrace with a notebook full of colored tabs. She wrote a sentence and underlined it twice. "Home is the promise you keep to yourself, so you have more to give." She tore the page out and pinned it inside the foundation door, where people leave small notes. Below it, someone had drawn a heart with 2 initials, M and H. The bells rang for evening. The sea exhaled. The town rolled its awnings down and set out chairs. The quiet that remained was not emptiness. It was presence. It stayed. And far from the old house on Maple Street, far from overdue notices and missed calls, the story of one late beginning kept moving. From hand to hand, from mouth to mouth, as steady as a tide and as gentle as a prayer.